Candace Owens screams at Jasmine Crockett on stage. Jasmine's calm reply stuns the crowd, became one of the most talked about moments in recent political and cultural debate because it symbolized not only a clash of personalities but also a larger collision of ideas, styles, and generational approaches to public discourse. And to understand why this singular event resonated so strongly, one must trace the backgrounds, reputations, and strategies of both figures as well as the dynamics of the event itself, because Candace Owens, known widely for her fiery, uncompromising, and sometimes confrontational manner of articulating conservative viewpoints, has built a brand around bold proclamations, sharp critiques of liberal orthodoxy, and a refusal to be intimidated by opposition. And Jasmine Crockett, a rising Democratic politician celebrated for her articulate, steady, and strategically calm approach, represents an almost opposite energy, relying on composure, rhetorical precision, and subtle but firm rebuttals rather than loud confrontation. So when the two were placed together on the same stage, the atmosphere was already charged with anticipation, as audiences both in person and online expected sparks to fly. Yet what unfolded exceeded those expectations and provided a viral lesson in contrast. Owens, true to her persona, leaned into volume, passion, and intensity, raising her voice, gesturing with her hands, and escalating her delivery until it felt like shouting, in an effort to dominate the stage and corner Crockett into a defensive position. But Crockett, instead of matching that intensity or rising to the bait, took a deep breath, waited for the noise to subside, and delivered a calm, measured reply that not only dismantled the argumentative points but also changed the emotional temperature of the room, drawing murmurs, applause, and eventually roaring cheers from the crowd, because what audiences witnessed was not just a political debate but a clash of communication strategies. On one hand the rhetoric of volume and force, and on the other the rhetoric of composure and logic, and the outcome made many observers reflect on how power is not always held by the loudest voice but sometimes by the one who remains unshaken. For as Owens raised her voice to emphasize claims about government overreach, personal responsibility, and accusations against liberal hypocrisy, Crockett responded with steady references to data, anecdotes from her own experience in Congress, and an almost lawyer-like precision in dismantling contradictions in Owens's arguments. And this balance of temperament versus intensity revealed something fundamental about persuasion, that audiences, though initially excited by fireworks, often leave most impressed by the person who maintains dignity under pressure. And indeed, as Crockett calmly explained her perspective on justice, equity, and systemic issues, never once allowing her tone to slip into anger or insult, she demonstrated a discipline that highlighted a generational shift, especially among younger progressive voices who believe that winning the narrative does not require shouting down an opponent but rather showing the hollowness of their shouting by refusing to engage on that level. And as the cameras captured Owens's increasingly exasperated tone alongside Crockett's composed expressions, the viral clip spread across social media with millions of views, countless memes, and polarized commentary, with conservatives applauding Owens's passion while moderates and liberals celebrated Crockett's grace under fire. Yet beyond the partisan interpretations, communication experts dissected the moment as a case study in rhetorical effectiveness, noting that Owens's screaming, while dramatic, risked alienating undecided listeners by seeming unprofessional, while Crockett's calmness not only elevated her credibility but also produced the contrast that amplified Owens's intensity to the point of seeming excessive, and thus what might have been remembered as just another heated exchange on stage instead transformed into a symbolic victory for composure. And when one considers the long history of debates, from Lincoln Douglas to modern televised clashes, one can see how audiences have often remembered not only what was said but how it was said. And in this instance, the calm reply delivered by Crockett became the quote, the clip, the turning point replayed endlessly, demonstrating how in the era of viral media, tone can matter as much as content, because viewers scrolling through their feeds may only watch 10 seconds, but in those 10 seconds Crockett's restraint contrasted with Owens's intensity created a story arc on its own. The aggressor and the composed respondent, the scream and the calm, the storm and the stillness, and it is within that contrast that the crowd's reaction becomes understandable. For people who attend live events often expect to see passion but do not always expect to see grace under pressure. And so when Crockett delivered her remarks, speaking about the importance of listening to communities, the failures of reducing complex issues to shouting matches, and the need for dialogue rather than attacks, the audience erupted not just in support of her political message but in admiration of her self-control, because in human psychology, when one person shouts and another refuses to be shaken, the latter often gains the moral high ground. A principle echoed in countless leadership studies that emphasize emotional regulation as a sign of strength, and Crockett's reply tapped into that archetype of quiet power, showing that true confidence does not need to raise its voice. And if one reflects further, This moment also reveals how political theater has evolved in the digital age, where the most effective strategy is not always to dominate the room in real time but to create a clip that will resonate across millions of screens later, and in that sense, Crockett's calm reply was not only a spontaneous demonstration of discipline but also an instinctively media-savvy move, because it positioned her as the adult in the room, a role that tends to be rewarded in the court of public opinion, while Owens' scream, though in character for her brand, risked being edited, remixed, and reframed as a loss of control, and so, days after the event, commentary shifted away from the substance of the policies debated and focused instead on the optics, the lessons in temperament, and the question of what leadership looks like, with pundits and citizens alike asking, do we want leaders who scream or leaders who can stay calm when screamed at? And that question became the true legacy of this encounter, extending far beyond partisan boundaries, turning into a larger cultural reflection about strength, communication, and the future of public dialogue. And so when one looks back at the headline Candace Owens screams at Jasmine Crockett on stage, Jasmine's calm reply stuns the crowd, it becomes clear that the reason it resonated is not simply because one person shouted and another responded, but because in that single exchange a microcosm of American discourse was revealed, with its tensions, its polarization, its theatricality, and its yearning for something more constructive, and perhaps, just perhaps, the stunned crowd was not only applauding Crockett's reply but also expressing a deeper hope that composure, clarity, and calm might still triumph over noise in an age defined by shouting matches, and that is why this story, retold, analyzed, and replayed thousands of times, continues to echo not only as a political anecdote but as a cultural parable of how strength can manifest not in the loudest scream but in the calmest reply, reminding us that sometimes the most powerful weapon on stage is silence followed by a few carefully chosen words.